Back in 2015, Nintendo released a unique strategy game for the 3DS called Codename S.T.E.A.M. On the surface, it sounded like a fairly standard turn-based tactics title, but what really set it apart was its absolutely bonkers premise. This game features none other than Abraham Lincoln leading a team of characters from classic literature and folklore to fight off an alien invasion, all set in a steampunk comic book world. And yes, you read that right, Honest Abe vs. aliens with a squad full of heroes pulled from books and legends. It doesn't get much more bizarre than that. Well, maybe it does because this exists. But let's back up a bit though and see how this game came to be, what people expected from it, and what exactly this wild adventure is all about. Codename S.T.E.A.M was first unveiled at E3 2014 during a Nintendo developer event. The game was developed by Intelligent Systems, who you likely know from Fire Emblem and Advance Wars, so strategy fans immediately took notice to this. But instead of a new entry in those beloved series, Nintendo was showing off a brand new IP with a stylized Western comic book vibe. In fact, the title S.T.E.A.M, which is an acronym, stands for Strike Team Eliminating the Alien Menace. Initial fan reaction was mixed, to put it mildly. On one hand, some people were intrigued that the Fire Emblem devs were trying something new. On the other hand, many longtime fans were hoping for a revival of other dormant franchises. Like when the game was announced, the internet was flooded with comments like, "Where's Golden Sun?" After that E3 reveal was over, the general hype among Nintendo fans was pretty muted, with a lot of folks simply not sure what to make of the strange new project. Nintendo clearly recognized the uncertainty, because in early 2015, they dropped a substantial free demo on the 3DS eShop to get people on board. This demo offered multiple missions, which was almost 90 minutes of gameplay, and gave players a taste of what this game had to offer. Behind the scenes, the developers had interesting motivations for this design. Intelligent Systems' Satoshi Yamagami, who was the producer of the project, had been thinking about why some players shy away from strategy games. His conclusion was that traditional turn-based games put too much abstraction between the player and the action. And the solution? Make a strategy game that feels more immediate and more immersive by borrowing elements from shooters. In other words, Codename S.T.E.A.M was designed to play like XCOM or Valkyrie Chronicles as a tactical game, but viewed right over your character's shoulders instead of a distant overhead map. On top of that, the team wrapped the whole thing in a stylized comic book presentation, taking inspiration from Silver Age American comics, with the devs citing legends like Jack Kirby and Bruce Timm as influences. And just to add one more thing, they infused the world with a steampunk aesthetic and plenty of nods to classic sci-fi horror. Many of the alien designs were inspired by the works of H.P. Lovecraft. It was as if Intelligent Systems threw a bunch of cool, crazy ideas in a blender to just see what would come out. So if nothing else, Codename S.T.E.A.M had ambition. This wasn't a safe sequel or a generic formula, it was Nintendo actually taking a risk on a weird new idea in the middle of the 3DS era. So after all this, the stage was set to release in March, and I've already talked enough about what led up to this, but what about the game itself? So Codename S.T.E.A.M is set in an alternate history steampunk version of the late 19th century. The Japanese title of the game translates to Lincoln vs. Aliens, which gives you a pretty good idea of what's going on. The story kicks off in London during a grand world fair celebrating steam technology. Without warning, aliens invade the city in a full-on assault. And these aren't little green men either, they're monstrous, tentacled, Lovecraftian beasts coming out of portals and attacking civilians, like Endgame style. As chaos takes over London, an unexpected savior arrives, and it's none other than President Abraham Lincoln. In this universe, Lincoln wasn't assassinated at Ford's Theater. Instead, it's revealed he survived, or perhaps faked his death, and had been secretly organizing a task force to defend Earth from extraterrestrial threats. And I just want to know, what is it with people putting Abraham Lincoln in these crazy scenarios in fiction? But anyway, he swoops into London on a flying airship, because, of course, and he conscripts a pair of American soldiers on the ground, Henry Fleming and John Henry, into his new unit. This elite squad is the titular S.T.E.A.M, and their mission is to repel the alien invasion and save the day. From there, Lincoln travels the world recruiting more heroes to join S.T.E.A.M, and this is where the game's wildly creative character roster comes in. Intelligent Systems essentially created their own version of the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, pulling heroes from American literature and folklore, and especially ones in the public domain, and imagining them as steampunk action heroes. Your team's starting member is Henry Fleming, the protagonist of Stephen Crane's Civil War novel The Red Badge of Courage. He's quickly joined by John Henry, the African-American folk hero known for hammering through rock in the railroad days, and in the game, John Henry carries a massive steampunk hammer as his weapon. And that's just the beginning. There's Tiger Lily from Peter Pan, who's reimagined here. She wields healing powers and a very large sniper rifle. There's Tom Sawyer, who is of course from the Mark Twain novel, and he shows up as a crafty rifleman on the team. And then the game pulls not one, not two, but three characters from The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. The Cowardly Lion, Tin Man, and Scarecrow all join S.T.E.A.M. The Lion, for example, is no longer cowardly in this game. He's a brawler with a jetpack that lets him leap into enemies' faces for close combat. From Herman Melville's Moby Dick, we get Queequeg, if I'm pronouncing that right. Naturally, his weapon is a multi-shot harpoon gun. Representing the Lovecraft influence, one of the later recruits is Randolph Carter, a character from H.P. Lovecraft stories. There's also Califia, a character based on the mythic Queen Califia from a 16th century Spanish novel, and in the game she wields explosives. Running out the roster is the Fox, who's a vigilante character inspired by old frontier stories, and there's a few other, totaling 12 playable characters by the end of the campaign. As you can tell, this is a very creative cast. And as for President Lincoln himself, he plays the role of mission commander for most of the game. You get briefed by him between missions, but Lincoln isn't content to sit on the sidelines the entire time. At pivotal moments, you bust out a giant steam-powered mech called Abe, Atomic Boiler Exoskeleton, which is shaped like a huge robotic Abraham Lincoln. In these sequences, Lincoln literally joins the battle by piloting his mech and punching out giant alien bosses. The visual of the 16th US president in a mech, trading blows with a Lovecraftian monster atop Big Ben, is something you really have to see to believe. It's just a very goofy premise that is hard to take seriously. And if that wasn't crossover enough, Nintendo even threw in a bonus for fans, which was Amiibo support. Codename Steam has a distinction of featuring characters from the Fire Emblem series as optional bonus squad members if you scan their Amiibo figures. By tapping the Marth, Ike, Lucina, or Robin Amiibo on a new 3DS or using the NFC reader on the regular 3DS, you can summon those heroes into the game as playable characters. So that's right, you could technically have Marth and Ike fighting aliens alongside Abraham Lincoln and Tiger Lily, which has so many lore implications that I don't even want to get into here. It's just explained as them taking them from other dimensions, and it's completely out of left field, but it's a fun Easter egg for Nintendo fans and gives you something to do with these Amiibo. The Fire Emblem characters are actually quite strong allies, though if they died in battle, you'd have to rescan the Amiibo to bring them back. Any bit of Fire Emblem's permanent attention to their inclusion. But beyond all the silliness, there's actually a pretty deep strategy game here. The gameplay here blends turn-based strategy with third-person shooter elements in a way that's pretty novel for a Nintendo title. If you've ever played Sega's Valkyrie Chronicles or the modern XCOM games, you'll have a general idea of what it is. You control a squad of up to 4 agents on 3D battlefields, taking turns moving and attacking, and then the aliens take their turn moving and counterattacking. The twist is that all your actions are governed by your character's steam. Each actor carries a boiler pack that generates a certain amount of steam per day, say like 10 units of steam. Moving your character forward a few steps will consume a couple units, represented by an on-screen gauge, and firing a weapon will consume more, depending on the weapon's cost. For example, Henry Fleming's standard rifle might use 3 units of steam per shot, while the Lion's heavy melee attack might use more. If you run out of steam, the characters can't move or attack further until the next turn when the boilers refill. This creates a good tactical balance because you want to cover ground and grab objectives, but you also need to save enough steam for combat, so you're not caught empty when an alien shows up. Also, how many times did I just say steam in that section? The steam system also enables Overwatch attacks, which are crucial, and yes, they're called Overwatch attacks. Certain weapons allow a character to automatically fire at an enemy during the enemy's turn if you've left enough steam in the tank to pay for a shot. For instance, if Henry's rifle costs 3 steam to fire, and you end your turn with at least 3 steam remaining for him, then on the enemy's turn, Henry will take a reactive shot at the first alien that wanders into his line of sight. These Overwatch attacks can even stun enemies and halt their movement if you're lucky. Both you and the aliens can use Overwatch, so positioning your team to take advantage of ambushes and avoiding obvious enemy sightlines becomes a key part of the strategy. Often the map gives incentives to hurry, like bonus rewards if you clear a level within a certain number of turns, so you're constantly weighing risk versus reward, which keeps the gameplay engaging. Unlike a traditional strategy RPG with a top-down grid, here you're down in the trenches. You move each character around in a third-person view using the circle pad to walk them around corners and to cover up ladders, etc. You can manually aim your weapons in a behind-the-shoulder view, either using the face buttons to fine-tune aim or the 3DS's stylus touchscreen, or the C-stick on the new 3DS to line up shots. Enemies have glowing weak points that flash, encouraging you to aim carefully for bonus damage. The control scheme was a bit unusual, and some found the tiny C-stick on the new 3DS to be wonky at best for precision aiming, though using the stylus could help. The bigger adjustment, however, is learning to fight without an overhead map. You can't see the whole layout or enemy positions from above, and there's no mini-map either, so you have to scout around by physically looking with your character's viewpoints. You can switch between your squad members' perspectives on the fly, essentially using one Asian to peek around a corner while another one watches their back. In fact, here's one tip. If you climb to high ground with the character, you can get a better look around since the camera's higher up, but doing so might expose that character to attacks. This design decision, while immersive, means that surprises lurk everywhere. An alien might be around the next alley, but you won't know until you get there. The game got a lot of criticism for this, because it kind of encouraged painfully slow, inch-by-inch movement, but then others argued it was a fresh change that forced players to utilize line of sight and memory, making the suspense part of it fun. It is a very divisive element of Steam's gameplay. You pretty much either love it or hate it. As the campaign progresses, your arsenal grows considerably. Each hero comes with a unique primary weapon that suits their personality. For example, John Henry's bear grenade launcher lobs explosives, and an arc great for hitting enemies behind cover. In addition to their main weapon, characters can equip a secondary sub-weapon of your choosing. Sub-weapons are unlocked by collecting medals during missions. These range from standard grenades from shotguns to tools like the banana pult, which, as the name suggests, launches banana peels that cause aliens to slip inside. You can mix and match sub-weapons on any character, letting you customize your squad's loadout before each mission. Every character also has an innate special ability and a once per mission special attack. For example, Tom Sawyer's special ability lets your team collect extra coins because he's greedy after all. Queequeg's special ability fires a giant harpoon that can skewer multiple enemies in a line, and so on. These specials don't cost any steam, but you can only use each character's special move once per map, so it's best saved for a clutch moment. They often come with over-the-top animated cutscenes, because of course it does in this game. To encourage exploration, each level has a handful of hidden gears to find as well. Collect enough gears and you'll unlock new boilers for your team. These are essentially upgraded backpacks that can increase a character's steam capacity or grant other passive bonuses. For instance, one boiler might give a character 12 steam per turn instead of 10, them, letting them move farther or attack more. Another boiler might trade off some maximum steam in exchange for a bit of health regeneration each turn. Choosing the right boiler for each agent adds another layer of strategy, especially in later levels when you know what kind of enemies or terrain changes are coming. Most missions involve getting your squad from the start to the goal point, often fighting through waves of aliens en route or protecting friendly units. There's also occasional boss battles, usually massive aliens that require hitting specific weak points or using a certain character's ability to expose them. One memorable boss here, and minor spoilers here, is the Queen Alien towards the end, which resembles a giant Lovecraftian squid and will bombard the team with lethal attacks unless you disable its minion in time. These fights can actually be pretty tough, but the game does provide mid-mission save points. You can spend some of your collected medals at these checkpoints to save your progress, heal your squad, or even revive fallen teammates. It is a nice feature that lets you push on if you're struggling, though you may want to save your medals if you're able to. One thing you'll notice during gameplay is the audio design. When it's the enemy's turn, you hear aliens moving outside making like this gurgling noise. The music even changes on enemies' turns with dynamic tunes that give you this comic book vibe, if that makes sense. In fact, if you ever quit a mission and return to the title screen, you're treated to an upbeat theme song for the game, complete with the narrator talking about the plot as if it's an old radio show. So between the strategic depth of managing steam and positioning, the mechanical uniqueness of each character, and the layer of goofy retro style here, Codenames Steam has a gameplay experience unlike anything else on the 3DS, and really anything else ever made. However, it wasn't all smooth sailing, because we have to talk about this game's most infamous flaw, and it's something that nearly every player and reviewer called out: the enemy turn times. In the initial release of the game, when you ended your turn and the aliens began theirs, you often had to endure some seriously long waits. Since you can't see the aliens unless one of your character has line of sight, you mostly just sit there and stare at your screen while hearing the creatures shuffle around somewhere in the level. This could go on for 30 seconds, 60 seconds, sometimes even more if there were a lot of aliens active. It disrupted the pacing badly. Imagine you just finished your turn and the pacing's going well, and then you just have to stop here and twiddle your thumbs listening to footsteps. No matter what review you read, you're gonna see something about this here. The issues here were very clear and very outspoken, so within a month of the North American launch, there was a free update that added a fast forward feature for enemy turns. By holding a button, you can speed up the aliens' movements to roughly double speed on a regular 3DS and even faster on the new Nintendo 3DS. This patch dramatically improved the experience because suddenly those alien turns became just much more tolerable. There are even reviewers who increased their review scores of the game, sometimes close to double, just because that was such a big issue with it that it caused people to not even want to finish the game. So even with that in mind, how was this game received? Critically, it landed in the middle of the road. It earned aggregate scores around 68 to 69% on game rankings and Metacritic, which indicated very mixed reviews overall. In an era where Intelligent Systems' other strategy games like Fire Emblem Awakening had a ton of praise, Steam had a much more polarizing response. Some reviewers generally enjoyed the game's depth and overall vibe. Usually the highest scores you'll see for this are around an 8, saying that the game's premise really shines through and that it's a fun game to play, but there were also many critical reviewers here. GameSpot gave it a 4 out of 10 and just took issues with the lack of any map or radar, and really had an issue with the overly cautious playstyle. The wide range of opinions makes sense given the game's nature. It is doing something different, which some will find refreshing and others will find off-putting. It's not as polished or tightly designed as, say, a mainline Fire Emblem game, so expectations had to be managed. Unfortunately, many reviewers and players just weren't fully sold on this game, and that did translate to very poor sales. Commercially, Codenames Steam was, to put it bluntly, a flop. In Japan, it barely even registered. Its first week on sale, it sold under 1,900 copies total, which is shockingly low, even understanding that the theme might not appeal broadly to a Japanese audience. In North America and Europe, Nintendo didn't release official numbers, but all signs point to it underperforming. The game never became a big thing in 2015, and retailers were discounting it not long after release. Part of the issue was timing and competition. By summer 2015, the much anticipated Fire Emblem Fates came out in Japan and in 2016 in the West, and that drew all the attention of strategy fans. Nintendo also didn't market it heavily beyond that initial reveal and demo. Once it launched with mediocre reviews, there wasn't really much of a second push. It's just kind of one of those experiments that just didn't catch on, and I remember this very vividly when it came out. Like, as someone who was keeping up with directs and all the new Nintendo games, I knew about this, but I can't imagine that the average 3DS owner had any idea this existed. And during this time, there were a lot of games like this that had solid enough games, but just didn't catch on. Think like The Wonderful 101, something like that. Now, among those who did buy and play Codenames Steam, there is a small but passionate group of fans. Over the years since its release, there's been a lot of people talking about this as an underrated gem, and people asking for a sequel, but there really hasn't been too much talk about it, because when I set out to write this script, I looked on YouTube to see if anyone's done anything similar, and I really have not seen much about this in years. And also in some of my research for this, it seems like the press went a little too hard on this. It is a fully functional strategy game with a lot of content, 16 mission campaign, bonus unlockable missions, online multiplayer modes, and yes, it did have 1v1 online and local multiplayer, where two players could pit teams against each other or compete in a medal collecting deathmatch, and it attempted something pretty unique, and there really wasn't much like this on the 3DS. Once the fast forward mechanic came out, this was a much better game. However, to be fair, some of the criticisms remain valid. The lack of an overhead view can make the gameplay feel clunky at times. You might spend a lot of time on a mission simply trying to find that last alien hiding in a corner. The characters, while colorful, don't have much interaction or development beyond their initial introductions. There's not much story here, it's kind of just shoot the aliens. So if someone came looking for a deep narrative or some really intricate lore here, they're going to be disappointed. So I feel like the game really excels in its concept, but doesn't really have the best execution. After 2015, when this game was released, Nintendo has rarely even acknowledged this game since. There was never any DLC or expansion beyond the free patch. By the end of the 3DS's life, Steam was rarely, if ever, referenced by Nintendo, with a couple small exceptions. In Smash Ultimate, there was a small cameo. The main character, Henry Fleming, appears as a collectible spirit, and a few of the game's music tracks are included in Smash's huge soundtrack. It was a nice nod to fans saying that this game does exist, but that's pretty much it. If you want to play this game now, it's not going to cost you much at all. You could probably find this for under $10. So Steam might not have set the sales charts on fire, but it does remain one of the quirkiest experiments Nintendo's ever put out on a handheld, and maybe even ever, just with the absurd concept here. It took the famed strategic depth of intelligent systems and wrapped it in a layer that just goes really hardcore into Americana. It's also kind of amazing this actually was a full retail title, because this was the era when Nintendo was trying to release a lot of digital-only games. Like there was Rusty's Real Deal Baseball, which I covered in another video if you want to check it out. There was the Pushmo series, there was the Box Boy games, and pretty much all those games are only playable on 3DSs that bought them, or if you want to sail the seas, but since Codename Steam got a physical release, you can still play this game. Having played the game much later after its release, with patches and updates, I can say that I do appreciate what the game tried to do. Now, I'm not really the target audience for this. I'm not a huge Fire Emblem fan or strategy fan, but I can appreciate the game for what it is. It's a game with a lot of memorable moments, but the gameplay wasn't the best to me. For those who might be more into the style of game, I definitely think it's worth it to pick up, especially at its price. It is a bit of a lengthy game, and it can be challenging, and some later maps especially can really test your strategy and patience, and that might be just what someone's looking for, if we're being honest. And that pretty much closes the story on Codename Steam. As far as I can tell, this game really hasn't been acknowledged in any way since 2018 in Smash Ultimate. There's never been any port, any remaster, any remake, anything else for this game, and it makes sense considering that this game did sell very poorly. I think if it came out on Switch now, it would at least do a little better. It would have more quality of life improvements, it would look better, it would have a bigger audience on the Switch, but I highly doubt we ever see this game officially again. I do kind of miss this era of Nintendo though, when they would actually release brand new IPs and try to experiment more. Because you could say what you want about this game, that it doesn't have the best gameplay or it doesn't play out the best, but you can't say that they didn't try to be creative here. And that's my retrospective on Codename Steam. It's a game that really doesn't get a lot of attention, and I think it deserves at least a little bit. If you want to see me talk about other underappreciated games, or games that just haven't been talked about much in recent years, I have videos on Nintendo Badgercade, on Rusty's Real Deal Baseball, on the Pushmo series, on the Box Boy series, so you should check those out. Be sure to subscribe and join my Discord, and thank you for watching Domainy.